The wind carried a sharp chill across the open fields that evening, the kind that made every creature seek shelter before the sky turned darker than a shut barn door. The old ranch sat quiet under the coming storm, its wooden beams groaning as if they remembered every hardship that land had seen. Yet beneath all that silence, danger moved like a shadow hunting for breath. That night, the land wasn't quiet because it was peaceful. It was quiet because something was wrong. Inside the dim barn, hidden behind stacked bales of hay, a young woman pressed her trembling hands against her chest, trying to steady her breath. Her name was Leora, and she had been running since sunrise. Her dress was torn at the hem, dust worked into every thread, and her heartbeat thudded loud enough for her to fear the men chasing her could hear it from the other end of the valley. She hadn't meant to trespass on anyone's ranch. She had only followed the narrow trail that led away from danger, hoping it would take her somewhere the world would stop closing in on her. A horse snorted nearby, a deep, uneasy sound. Leora flinched and pressed herself even deeper into the hay, letting the loose strands cling to her hair. She could hear voices outside the barn, rough and angry. The same men who had tried to seize her earlier at the trading post. The same men who believed a woman alone had no right to stand her ground. The storm clouds overhead were rolling fast, but the storm coming for her was far worse. Bootsteps crunched outside. Someone kicked the barn door. Leora held her breath so tight her ribs ached. If they found her now, she wouldn't have a chance. She closed her eyes, praying to be invisible, praying for the wind to swallow her scent, praying for anything stronger than her fear. Then the barn door creaked open. But instead of heavy boots stomping inside, she heard a soft whisper of leather and feathers brushing wood. She didn't dare move. A faint orange glow flickered from the lantern outside, enough for her to see the shadow of a tall figure entering. Broad shoulders, silent steps, and then the low call of a trained hawk perched on his arm. Leora swallowed hard. This wasn't one of the men chasing her. This was someone else. The figure walked with the slow patience of a hunter who didn't need to hurry. He paused near the horse stalls, his breath steady, his movements calm as a river at dusk. She didn't know his name, but she knew his kind. Apache, a warrior of the mountains. A man the frontier spoke about in low voices. As though his footsteps carried the strength of old earth, he stepped closer. Leora's pulse hammered. Hay stuck to her cheek as she lowered her head, hoping he would pass without noticing. But he dropped to a knee beside the stacked bales, and his voice broke through the dark, warm and quiet as a campfire settling. "You're safe here," Leora froze. The words weren't harsh, like the ones shouted by her pursuers. They weren't commanding or mocking. They held a steady strength, a promise she didn't understand, but felt deep in her bones. Slowly, she lifted her gaze. The warrior's face came into view, sharply cut by firelight. His long, dark hair was tied back with braided leather, and the eagle feathers on his shoulder moved gently with his breath. His hawk tilted its head, studying her with sharp golden eyes. Leora tried to speak, but her voice faltered. "I didn't mean to hide on your land. I just needed a place to breathe. They were chasing me. I didn't know where else to go." His eyes, dark as canyon stone, didn't waver. "I know who they are. I saw them from the ridge." He shifted slightly, lowering his arm so the hawk settled quietly. "They won't set foot in this barn. Not while I'm here." His calm certainty washed over her like warm rain after drought, yet she couldn't shake the fear wrapped around her chest. "Why would you help me?" Her voice cracked. "You don't even know who I am." "I don't need to know your name to see you're hunted." He extended his hand, slow enough not to startle her. "This land has rules. You protect those who seek shelter. It is the old way." Leora looked at his hand, strong, calloused, steady. Her fingers twitched toward it, then hesitated. She wasn't sure if she trusted fate to give her something safe for once. But before she could decide, the distant sound of horses breaking through brush snapped her back to reality. The men had followed her trail. Fear surged through her, sharp as a knife drawn too quickly. The warrior reacted instantly, not with panic, but purpose. He shifted in front of her, placing his body between her and the barn entrance. His hawk spread its wings, feathers brushing the air with a silky rush. "Stay behind me," he said. Leora did because something in his voice made disobedience impossible. Heavy footsteps approached the barn again, louder this time. Someone struck the door with a fist, rattling it on its hinges. "We know she's in there," a voice barked. "Open up." The warrior didn't move. His jaw tightened, but his breathing stayed even. He lifted one hand, motioning for Leora to remain still. Outside, the men muttered, boots stomping in frustration. "Open this door now, or we'll break it down." The warrior leaned close to her, his breath warm against her ear as he whispered, "Do not be afraid. Fear feeds them." Leora nodded weakly, though her heart threatened to burst through her ribs. She clutched her arms, willing her body not to shake. The door rattled again, wood cracking under the force. The warrior's hawk gave a sharp cry. Then everything went still. Outside, a gust of wind slammed across the yard, scattering fallen branches and stirring dust like a warning sent from the sky. The men cursed. One of them shouted about the storm rolling in too fast. Another insisted they check the next ranch before the trail washed out in rain. Voices shifted, angry but retreating. Hooves pounded through mud as they rode off, their silhouettes fading into the deepening dusk. Silence returned to the barn. Heavier than before, but safer somehow. Leora let out a shaking breath, her knees weakening. The warrior turned to her, studying her face as though reading the truth she was too afraid to speak. His expression softened just an inch, a fraction only someone desperate for kindness would notice. "You ran far," he said, "but not far enough to carry your fear alone." She didn't know how he understood her so well. She didn't know why he stood between her and danger without hesitation. She didn't know why his presence steadied the trembling inside her. But she knew one thing with absolute clarity. This man had just saved her life. "What? What do I do now?" she whispered. The warrior looked toward the storm building beyond the barn. The sky flashed pale. The rumble of thunder rolled across the valley like drums calling warriors to rise. "You stay here tonight," he said. "The land is turning wild, and the men who hunt you aren't finished yet." His gaze met hers, steady and unreadable. "Before dawn comes, you must tell me why they want you." Leora swallowed hard, her breath catching in her throat. The truth she had been running from pressed against her ribs, threatening to rise. She wasn't sure she could speak it. She wasn't sure anyone would believe her. But the warrior waited, the storm closing in around the barn. And she knew she couldn't keep running forever. Before she could answer, something outside snapped loudly, as if a branch broke under weight. The warrior straightened. His hand went to the knife at his belt. The danger wasn't gone. Something, or someone, had returned, and the night was only beginning. The sound outside wasn't just a branch snapping this time. It carried weight, a slow drag across the wet ground, as if someone was circling the barn with careful, measured steps. Leora's breath hitched again. The warrior motioned for her to stay low behind the hay, then rose with the silent strength of a mountain cat. His hawk shifted on his arm, feathers tense, eyes fixed on the shadows creeping behind the wooden boards. Rain began to fall in thin needles, tapping softly against the barn roof. The storm lightened the air, but it didn't wash away the danger pressing in from every side. Leora pulled her knees to her chest, trying to force her thoughts into something steady. But all she could feel was the fear crawling up her spine. She had escaped once today, yes, but men like the ones hunting her didn't give up so easily. The warrior stepped toward the barn door, his hand resting on the hilt of his blade. He didn't open the door, didn't call out, didn't demand for whoever was outside to show themselves. Instead, he listened. Every part of him sharpened to the smallest sound. Leora watched him, noticing how his chest rose slow and deep, how his eyes narrowed with purpose, how the storm reflected in the strands of his long hair. Another sound came, a shuffle of boots, softer than before, as if someone hoped to blend into the rain. The warrior spoke low enough that only Leora could hear. "Stay unseen. If they enter, you run through the back and keep to the creek. Do not look back." Leora shook her head immediately. "I can't run again. I've been running since dawn. You'll run if I tell you." His voice didn't rise, but the firmness in it left no room for argument. Your life matters more than your breath right now. She swallowed hard, fingers digging into the hay. A small part of her wanted to argue, to tell him she wasn't as fragile as she looked, that she had been forced to survive longer than he could imagine. But the larger part of her knew he was right. The land favored those who listened, not those who challenged every warning. Suddenly, the barn door rattled under a heavy push. Leora gasped and clamped her hands over her mouth. The warrior didn't flinch. He stood tall, shoulders squared, watching the door with cold readiness. Another push, another. But then a bolt of lightning cracked across the sky, so close the earth shuddered under its strike. The horses stamped nervously in their stalls. The hawk lifted its wings, ready for command. Outside, whoever lingered must have felt the storm tightening its grip. The dragging footsteps retreated into the darkness, swallowed by the wind and rain. The pressure on the barn eased. Still, the warrior waited another full minute before stepping back from the entrance, letting the rain's rhythm settle into something calmer. When he finally approached Leora, she exhaled shakily, gripping the hay to keep herself from shaking apart. He crouched beside her again, his sharp features softened by the dim lantern light. "They're testing the ground," he said. "Trying to see if you'll panic? They want you to fear the dark so much you run into their hands." Leora shivered. "Why do they want me so badly? They didn't even know me before today." His gaze searched her face, waiting. "Then tell me, what happened at the trading post?" She looked down, her hands trembling in her lap. The truth was tangled inside her, heavy with the weight of a past she hadn't meant to cross. "I was passing through," she began slowly, "just to get a few supplies for the road. My wagon wheel had broken 2 days back. I had barely enough money to buy anything. But I thought I could get flour, maybe a little salt." She paused, forcing herself to breathe as memories pressed in. "The storekeeper was arguing with those men when I arrived." She continued. "They were demanding he hand over a ledger. Something about land rights and stolen claims. I didn't pay attention at first, but then the storekeeper slipped the ledger into my satchel when I wasn't looking. He must have mistaken me for someone else. I didn't realize until those men turned on him, shouting that he had given it away." Her throat tightened. "When I walked outside, they followed. When they saw the corner of the ledger sticking from my bag, they came after me. I panicked. I got on my mule and rode until my hands were raw." The warrior absorbed every word, not interrupting, not doubting. "Show me the ledger." Her fingers trembled as she dug into her satchel. Inside, wrapped in cloth damp from the storm, lay a thick leather-bound book with cracked edges. The warrior opened it gently. Inside were pages filled with names, hand-drawn maps, secretly marked trails, and lists of properties across the frontier. Land owned, land stolen, land claimed by force. Leora recognized none of it, but she had seen enough in life to know. When greed fueled a man's decisions, the warrior's jaw tightened slightly as he turned each page. "This is more dangerous than you understand," he said. "This book carries truth men kill for. The lands marked here. They belong to families who were removed by force. Some belong to tribes, some to settlers who disappeared without a funeral." Leora felt cold run through her blood. "I didn't want any of this. I only wanted to escape." "Sometimes trouble rides faster than a horse," he answered. "But you found your way to the right place. This ranch is under protection. Any enemy that enters here knows what they risk." She watched him close the ledger and tuck it safely under his arm. Something about his steadiness steadied her too. His voice carried the kind of strength that came from surviving harsh lands, from knowing pain without letting it mold him into cruelty. "My name is Kalen," he said quietly, as if offering her the first piece of himself. "I patrol these lands. My people and the settlers nearby keep a fragile peace. But that peace is broken icily when greed enters." Leora nodded. "I didn't mean to bring trouble to your home." "You didn't bring it," he replied. "It follows its own scent." A distant thunderclap rolled across the valley. The storm was moving deeper, pushing the night toward a darker edge. Kalen rose to check the shutters along the barn walls, making sure nothing had loosened. His hawk flew up to the beams, watching from above like a guardian carved from shadow and gold. Leora pushed herself to her feet slowly, her body sore from fear's grip. She walked to the barn window and watched the rain blanket the ranch. The land stretched wide and wild, each tree bowing under the storm's pressure. A place like this held both danger and safety, maybe even hope. Kalen returned to her side. "You can't leave tonight," he said. "The storm will hide tracks, but it will also make you vulnerable. And those men, they don't seem like the kind who wait for daylight." She swallowed. "What if they come back?" "They will," he said simply. "Men who want something do not quit until they taste its worth. And this ledger has more worth than gold." Leora's breath grew shaky again, but Kalen placed a steady hand near her shoulder, not touching, but close enough to anchor her. "I will not let them near you," he said. "But before dawn, more will gather, and you must decide something important." She looked up at him, rainlight glimmering in her eyes. "Decide what?" Kellen's voice lowered, filled with the weight of the unknown ahead. "Whether you keep running, or whether you stay and fight for the truth in your hands." Leora's heart pounded at the thought. She had never fought anything except hunger, loss, and the heavy silence of loneliness. The idea of facing men who would hurt her without hesitation made her legs weaken. Before she could respond, the barn walls shuddered faintly. Not from wind, not from thunder. Something or someone moved outside again, footsteps slow and deliberate. Kellen's hand went to his knife. His hawk spread its wings, ready to strike. The storm hadn't driven the danger away, it had only hidden its approach, and whatever waited in the darkness now felt far more dangerous than before. The footsteps outside dragged with a slow, heavy weight, the kind that didn't belong to a wandering traveler or a startled animal. Leora's breath tightened again as the sound circled toward the far side of the barn. Kalen lifted his hand slightly, signaling her to stay behind him. His hawk shifted restlessly on the beam above, wings tense, eyes narrowed at the darkness pooling outside. The storm pressed harder against the wooden walls, cold wind slipping through the cracks and brushing their skin with a warning chill. Leora could feel her pulse thudding in her throat, each beat louder than the last. She wasn't sure if the danger outside was the same men who had chased her, or if the storm had stirred something else awake in the valley. Kalen moved toward the side door near the horse stalls, each step slow and deliberate. He leaned forward, listening to the faint scrape of boots, the rustling of wet grass, and a muffled voice that seemed unsure of its next move. Leora strained her ears, but could only hear the distant rumble of thunder. Then a low whistle echoed through the storm, sharp and quick. Kalen froze. "That signal doesn't belong to them," he murmured under his breath. Leora frowned. "Then who is it?" "Someone who knows this land," he replied. "Someone who knows me." Before Leora could question him further, Kalen slipped outside, blade drawn but held low. Leora stayed by the hay, heart pounding. Fear urged her to stay hidden, but curiosity tugged just as strongly. She moved closer to the stall opening, peeking through a narrow gap by the faint lantern glow. She saw a figure standing in the rain, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a hooded coat, water dripping from every seam. The stranger raised both hands slowly, showing they carried no weapon drawn. Kellen's stance lowered only a little. "State your reason." "You're sheltering a runaway," the stranger said, "and the men hunting her are circling the ridge ahead. You won't have long before they find the tracks they missed." Leora's heart sank. Her hands tightened around the beam beside her. She didn't recognize the stranger's voice, but their tone carried urgency, not threat. Kalen stepped closer. "How do you know this?" "Because I was above the ridge when the storm hit," the stranger answered, "and because trouble made its way downriver faster than you expected." The hawk overhead shrieked once, sharp with recognition. Kalen eased slightly, though tension still clung to his frame. "Taryn," he said, "you should have sent a message before approaching." The man pushed back his hood, revealing dark hair matted by rain and a stern, weathered face. "There wasn't time. And you're standing in the middle of a fire that hasn't even shown its full heat. Kaylin glanced back toward the barn, toward where Leora stood. She stiffened and stepped deeper behind the beam. But Taryn had already noticed her silhouette. So she's the one, Taryn said. Leora bristled, unsure whether she should remain unseen or step forward. Kaylin noticed her discomfort and motioned for her to approach. His expression softened a fraction as she walked out from behind the stall, though her step stayed small and guarded. This is Taryn, Kaylin said, a scout who tracks the borders. He has warned us of raids and storms long before they reached our people. Taryn nodded once in greeting. I'm here to help. But you need to understand the trouble following you. Leora hugged her arms, rain dripping from her lashes even inside the barn. I didn't mean for anyone to get involved. I didn't know the ledger meant so much. Taryn exchanged a look with Kaylin. The ledger is tied to land the settlers and tribes both claim. But some men with money and guns don't care whose blood they spill to own it, Kaylin added. If the ledger proves the land belongs to those who were forced off it, the men chasing you could lose everything they stole. Leora felt the weight of that truth sink into her bones. She had only wanted to survive. She hadn't realized she had taken hold of something powerful enough to change the fate of families, land, maybe entire settlements. Taryn continued. I saw them gather near the creek crossing. For at first, then 6. They're waiting for lightning to stop striking so they can move in closer. Leora's legs weakened. 6, they weren't that many before. Greed calls its own, Taryn said. They brought reinforcements. Kaylin shut the barn door, making sure it was barred. We need to move you at dawn, he said. The ranch will only hold them off for a short time. They know you're somewhere near, and the storm won't hide your presence forever. But where would we go? Leora asked. Taryn stepped forward. There's a canyon pass to ours southeast. Narrow enough that riders can't follow easily. If we reach the old mission hidden beyond it, we can keep her safe until we decide our next step. Kaylin shook his head. The canyon is full of washed-out trails after storms. Landslides, bad footing. If we take her there, she could fall or worse. We don't have safer options, Taryn argued. And leaving her here is asking for a gun barrel at your door before sunrise. Kellen's jaw tightened. The storm outside cracked again, rattling the barn roof. Leora looked between the two men, tension between them steadily rising. Kaylin ran his thumb over the hilt of his knife, considering. She's already exhausted. Sending her over the canyon in this weather is a risk I won't force on her. We won't force, Taryn said. We'll guide. And the sooner we move, the safer we'll be. Leora shook her head, voice trembling. I don't want either of you to risk your lives because of me. Kaylin turned toward her, his gaze steady and unshakable. This land is built on people risking their lives for one another. You're not a burden. You're in danger. There's a difference. She didn't know how someone like him could carry such calm strength. His presence steadied her, even as danger grew stronger around them. Taryn crouched near the horses, checking their hooves, brushing mud from their coats. The creek path is already filling, he said. By sunrise, the water will be waist deep. Kaylin nodded slowly. We can take the upper ridge. It's longer, but it avoids the water. Runs straight along the outlaw trail, Taryn countered. Kaylin didn't deny it. The decision hung in the air like a blade, suspended by thread. Leora stepped forward, her hands trembling, but she gathered her courage. I will go wherever you both think is safest. I trust your judgment more than my own. Kaylin stared at her a moment, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. Not pity, something steadier, stronger. Then we'll leave before the first light touches the valley, he said. Until then, you need rest. Strength will matter more than fear. Adon nodded. I'll keep watch outside. If they come close again, I'll signal. Kaylin placed a blanket near the hay for Leora. She sat slowly, her body heavy with exhaustion she could no longer hide. He knelt beside her, offering a cup of water. You've seen more than most see in a lifetime, he said gently. But don't carry it alone now. Leora's voice cracked softly. I don't want to bring harm to your land. Oh. You didn't, Kaylin replied. Their greed brought harm. You only revealed it? Outside, the storm began to soften, the wind easing into a cold whisper, but the danger remained a shadow stretching across the valley. Waiting for the right moment to strike, Kaelin moved to the entrance where Taryn stood. She's stronger than she looks. Taryn whispered. Sel nodded. Stronger, yes. But fear breaks even the strong. And what about you? Taryn asked quietly. Will fear break you too? Kaelin didn't respond. His eyes drifted back to the barn interior, where Leora wrapped herself in the blanket, staring at the ledger lying near the lantern. The weight of it seemed to pull her deeper into thought. The hawk perched above her, watching her with fierce curiosity, as if sensing something important in her presence. Kaelin tightened his grip on the barn door. Fear doesn't break me, he said, but losing someone under my protection might. Taryn studied him. Understanding more than Kaelin wished to admit, the storm clouds thinned above. But danger did not. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the men hunting Leora regrouped. Their horses restless, their voices lowered, their fury sharpening like knives. Dawn was still hours away, and the valley was holding its breath for whatever would come next. The wind outside shifted again. This time, with a colder bite, as if the storm had finished its anger but left something else prowling behind. Leora couldn't sleep, even though her body begged for rest. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw flashes of the men's faces at the trading post, their rough hands, their hungry eyes. She heard the crack of lightning, the smack of their boots in the mud, the storm whispering around her like a warning. She kept glancing toward Kaelin, who stood near the barn entrance with his back straight, blade resting in his hand. Watching the dark, like it might charge forward at any moment, Taryn stayed outside under the shadow of the roof's edge, keeping watch on the open fields. His silhouette moved only when necessary, sliding from one vantage point to another, scanning the ridge and the trail beyond the creek. Both men were carved into the night like they belonged to the land itself. Leora envied their calm, though she knew their calm came from years of danger breathing down their necks. The barn smelled of horses, damn wood, and the faint scent of sage that clung to Kellen's clothing. It grounded her, gave her something real to focus on besides fear. She tightened the blanket around her shoulders, the warmth barely chasing the cold trembling in her bones. Kellen's hawk fluttered down beside her and hopped close, lowering its head. Its feathers brushed her arm gently. She let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. You sense something too, she whispered. Kaelin glanced back at her. He didn't speak, but the look in his eyes said enough. He heard everything, felt everything. He wasn't easing up for a second. Leora stood and walked toward him quietly. You haven't rested at all, she said. You'll be exhausted before we even reach the ridge. Kellen's eyes softened for a moment. A warrior rests when the land rests. Tonight the land is awake. Her throat tightened, not because of fear this time, because the way he spoke carried a truth she hadn't known she needed. He wasn't just protecting her because it was duty. He was protecting her because he believed she deserved safety, even if she didn't believe it herself. Another gust of wind slammed against the barn door. This time, it wasn't followed by silence. Through the storm's fading growl came a faint, metallic clink. Leora stiffened. Kaelin stepped forward. Taryn, he called softly. Taryn appeared at the door instantly. They're out there, he said. One of them tested the fence line by the west oak. I saw his shadow break across the lantern light. Leora felt the blood drain from her face. Now, before dawn? They're impatient, Taryn said. The storm hid their steps. They think you're tired. They think fear will make you slow. Kellen's jaw tightened. They misjudge what stands in their way. The hawk screeched softly, wings half spread as if ready to bolt into the night. Kaelin touched its feathers, steadying it. Not yet, he murmured. Taryn pointed toward the hill beyond the barn. One rider is circling the east field. 2 more near the creek. They're trying to box us in. Leora's breathing turned uneven. How many? Enough, Taryn said grimly. More than 6 now, and they're desperate. Kaelin turned to Leora. You must stay close. When the time comes, you ride with me, not alone. Her voice wavered. "I can ride on my own." "You can," Kalen said gently, "but not while hunted." His words weren't meant to belittle her. They were meant to keep her alive. They began preparing quickly. Kalen checked the saddles, tightened the straps, packed dried meat and water into Leora's satchel, and placed the ledger inside a waterproof wrap. Every motion was quick but steady, like he had done this 100 times. Taryn strung his bow, leaning it against a post. The storm eased enough for the moon to cast a faint light across the fields, but the night still felt dangerous, as if the darkness itself held its breath. Leora stepped outside with Kalen and Taryn. The wind brushed her face cold and sharp. The ranch spread wide around them, the fences dark against the mud, the tall oak swaying in the wind like a sentinel warning them to move faster. Kalen studied the ridge to the west. "We go that way, quietly. Don't light anything." "Ah!" Taryn frowned. "They'll expect that route." "They expect many things," Kalen replied, "but not all of them." Leora followed their lead, her steps squishing in the wet ground. Her boots were soaked instantly, but she didn't complain. She focused on Kellen's silhouette ahead, how sure his steps were, how he guided the horses with silent hand signals. His hawk flew above them, invisible except for the occasional flicker of wings against the faint moonlight. They didn't speak for a long while. The only sound was the wind pushing through grass and the distant splash of water at the creek. Leora tried to steady her breathing, reminding herself she wasn't alone. She wasn't running aimlessly anymore, but the valley didn't stay quiet for long. From behind them came a distant shout, faint yet sharp. Another voice answered. Then came the unmistakable crack of a rifle shot cutting through the night. Leora flinched so hard she stumbled. Kalen grabbed her arm, pulling her close. "Keep moving," he whispered. They found the barn empty. Taryn sped ahead a few paces, scanning the hill's shadowed edges. His voice dropped low. "3 riders coming from the south. They're splitting up." Kellen's grip tightened on Leora's arm. "Stay with me." Her heart pounded so loudly she feared the riders might hear it miles away. She could already imagine their horses thundering closer, their torches swinging through the dark, their shouts clawing their way toward her. Kalen guided her toward the ridge trail. The path was narrow, with jagged rocks that glistened from the rain. One misstep could send a rider tumbling. Kalen took the lead, helping Leora climb the steeper parts, protecting her from slipping. But the voices behind them kept growing louder. "They're too close," Taryn murmured, nocking an arrow. "If they reach the ridge, they'll cut us off." Kalen paused and looked back. The faint glow of torches flickered through the distant trees. "Too many? Moving too fast? We need to throw them off," Kalen said. "Taryn, take the lower trail and draw them toward the creek." Taryn shook his head sharply. "They'll catch me before I reach the bend." "You're faster than they are," Kalen replied. "And if they chase you, Leora and I can reach the hidden cliff pass." "The cliff pass?" Taryn's eyes widened. "It's barely wide enough for 2, which is why they won't follow." Taryn looked at Leora then, the worry in his gaze clear, even in the weak moonlight. "If I do this, you must move quickly." No hesitation. Leora's stomach twisted. "I don't want you risking your life for me." Taryn let out a dry breath. "Risk is our daily bread in this land, and you carry something worth risking for." Kalen gripped Taryn's shoulder, their eyes locking with unspoken trust. Then Taryn sprinted down the slope, bow drawn, disappearing into the darkness. Seconds later, shouts rang out as he fired an arrow that whistled past the rider's path. "They took the bait," Kalen said. "Now we move." He guided Leora along the narrow ridge trail, his hand steady on her back. The rain had made the rocks slippery, and she nearly fell twice, but Kalen caught her each time, pulling her firmly against him until she found her balance again. Far below, torches swarmed toward Taryn's path. Leora's heart squeezed painfully. She prayed silently for his safety, though she didn't know if the land listened to prayers. Kalen and Leora climbed higher until the wind grew colder, sharper. The moonlight faded behind clouds, leaving only the outline of the pass ahead, a narrow cleft between 2 massive stone walls. It looked like a throat leading into the mountain's heart. Kaylin placed a hand on her shoulder. "Stay behind me. The trail is narrow and the drop is sharp." Leora nodded, swallowing her fear. Her legs were shaking now, and not just from exhaustion. Every sound felt louder: the wind, the scrape of rocks under Kellen's boots, the faint shouts far behind them. Halfway through the pass, Kaylin suddenly stopped and stiffened. Leora bumped into his back, startled. "What is it?" she whispered. Selen didn't answer immediately. His hand rose slowly, signaling her to stay silent. His hawk circled overhead, releasing a cry that echoed sharply between the stone walls. Then the sound came, not from behind, not from the valley, but ahead. Footsteps. Slow, confident, moving toward them through the narrow passage. Someone had reached the pass before them. Leora's breath caught painfully in her chest. Kaylin shifted, placing her behind him. The hawk swooped lower, its feathers brushing the stone. The footsteps grew louder. Someone was waiting in the dark. An escape had just become far more dangerous than the night. Behind them, the footsteps ahead grew louder, steady and sure, echoing off the narrow stone walls. Leora held her breath as Kaylin stepped in front of her, shielding her with his body. His hawk circled above them, ready to strike at his command. The wind whipped through the pass, tugging at Leora's blanket and reminding her just how high they were, how close the drop loomed behind her. The path was too tight for retreat, too dark for guessing. She pressed a hand to her chest and tried to steady the fear climbing toward her throat. A figure emerged from the shadows, but it wasn't one of the men who had chased her through the valley. It was a tall, older man, wrapped in a thick coat lined with fur, holding a lantern that glowed faint gold against the stone. His face was rugged, weathered by years of frontier storms, but his eyes were clear, alert, and not filled with the same hunger she had seen in her pursuers. He lifted the lantern a little higher when he saw Kaylin. "You're late," the man said. "I expected you before the storm broke." Kaylin exhaled, tension easing from his shoulders. "Iran," he said. "You couldn't have chosen a less dangerous place to wait?" Iran huffed out a dry laugh. "I didn't choose this place. Trouble chose it for us." Then his gaze shifted to Leora, softening with understanding. "You must be the one carrying the ledger. The whole valley's been rumbling about the trouble that book stirred." Leora stepped forward carefully, clutching her satchel. "I never meant for any of this. I was only passing through." "That's how most trouble begins," Aaron said with a gentle smile. "But you carried it bravely." He turned to Kaylin. "Taryn sent word when he drew the riders off. He's safe. A little bruised, but safe. He'll meet us at the mission." Relief washed over Leora so quickly she nearly lost her balance. Taryn was alive. He had risked everything, but he had survived. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, pretending the wind caused the tears. Kaylin touched her shoulder lightly. "We go." Daylight is climbing. Iran guided them through the rest of the pass, the narrow trail widening into a sheltered valley beyond. As they walked, the land softened. The storm had washed the air clean, leaving the scent of pine warming beneath the coming sun. Far below, the river gleamed like a silver snake. Birds began to stir, shaking wet feathers and calling to each other across the waking land. Leora felt her breath finally steady. It took another hour to reach the old mission, a quiet stone building tucked between two rising hills. Its wooden cross leaned slightly, weathered by years of sun and rain, but the structure held firm. It felt like a place built by hands that believed deeply in something good. Smoke drifted from the chimney, promising warmth. Taryn stepped out from behind the gate, limping slightly but wearing a tired grin. "Thought I'd lost you both to the canyon wind," he said. Kaylin clasped his arm. "You threw them off better than I hoped." Taryn shrugged. "I don't enjoy being chased, but I'm good at making others think they've won." Then he looked at Leora. "You held on?" "Not everyone does." Leora smiled faintly, her voice soft. "I didn't hold on alone."
Okay.
Inside the mission, they warmed themselves by the fire while Aaron brewed a pot of bitterroot tea that tasted far better than Leora expected. She sat near the flames, letting the heat soak through her cold fingers. Kalen set the ledger on a small wooden table, opening its worn cover as the others gathered around Dartna. Tapped a page. This is proof. Every stolen acre. Every forced claim. Every false signature. If we bring this to the judge in Red Hollow, these men won't be able to hide from the truth anymore. But they'll come after it, Leora said quietly. They won't stop just because we found shelter. Then we won't hide, Euron replied. We'll take this straight to the people it belongs to. Settlers and tribes alike. When enough of us stand together, those men will lose their power. Kalen nodded. They're strong in the shadows. But in daylight, truth is stronger. Leora breathed slowly, letting their confidence settle into her chest. She had feared for so long that she was alone. But here, surrounded by people who fought for justice and land rights, she felt something new, rising, a kind of courage she didn't know she had. They rested for several hours, waiting for the sun to fully break across the valley. The mission glowed with warm light as birds darted through open windows. Leora stepped outside for a moment, letting her eyes wander over the hills. The world looked softer now, wide, full of hope. She could almost believe she had a place in it again. Kalen joined her, standing beside her near the wooden fence. His presence brought a calm she hadn't felt anywhere else. You did well, he said. Fear didn't break you. She looked up at him, her voice hardly more than a whisper. It didn't break you either. Kalen smiled slightly. I had a reason not to let it. Her breath caught a soft, warm flutter she didn't know how to name. She hadn't known someone like him existed. Someone who carried strength in silence, who guarded without taking, who offered safety without expecting something in return. Kalen, she said, hesitation in her voice. When this is over, what happens to me? I have no home to go back to, no land, no family waiting. His expression turned thoughtful, gentle. A person without a place isn't lost. They're only waiting to choose the right one. She lowered her eyes. And where would that be? He didn't answer with words at first. Instead, he lifted her hand carefully, his touch warm and steady, as if asking her to trust the moment. Anywhere you choose, he said. But if you choose here, if you choose our land, you won't stand alone. Her heart held on to every word like they were the first roots of belonging she had ever found. Before she could speak again, Taryn called from the mission doorway. It's time. The riders are retreating. We have a clear path to Red Hollow. Kalen gave her a reassuring nod. Let's finish what we started. They saddled up and rode through the brightening valley. Euron carried the ledger. Taryn guarded their rear. Kalen rode beside Leora, guiding her mule through the rougher patches. As the land widened and the sun spilled across the plains, she felt the weight of her fear fade. Ahead lay justice, truth, and a future no longer shaped by the hands of greedy men. When they reached Red Hollow, the judge listened carefully as Taryn laid out the stolen land claims, the false maps, the signatures forged by men who believed no one would challenge them. Settlers gathered outside the courthouse, whispering, pointing, realizing what had been taken from them. Tribal elders arrived as well, their faces stern with old grief but brightening with new hope. By the time the sun touched the western hills, the verdict had been spoken. The stolen lands would be returned. The men who pursued Leora were bound in chains, their voices stripped of power. The valley breathed easier that evening, as though the weight it had carried for years finally lifted. Liora stood in the courthouse yard, watching people embrace, cry, laugh, and reclaim pieces of their past. Kalen approached her, his steps familiar and sure. You changed the land today, he said. Leora shook her head. I only ran with a ledger. You stood when others stayed silent, he replied. That takes more courage than you know. She felt warmth rise in her chest again, gentler this time. What now? She asked softly. Kalen extended his hand, palm up, steady as the ground he walked. Now you stay if you wish. The ranch is quiet. The land is peaceful. And you're safe here. Leora looked at his hand, then into his eyes, those deep, steady eyes that had never once let fear reach her. She placed her hand in his, her heart settling into a calm she had waited her whole life to feel. They walked back toward the valley together, the sky glowing gold around them, the future wide and open as the plains themselves. Leora knew she had found something far stronger than refuge. She had found home, and beside Kaelin, she would never run alone again.